middle school, RG Long was really into video games. And I thought the coolest thing that I might possibly ever do with my life would be to create a video game. So when I had my dial-up internet speed computer at home, one day I thought to type into the search engine, make an RPG. And what came up was RPG Maker 95. This was sometime around 1999 or so, and I remember diving into this program that allowed me to create my own video game. Hey, I'm RG Long, and I'm really excited for this video series of what I'm going to be talking about are the things that made me excited about fantasy, that really helped me go from like the next level of like, I'm a semi-casual nerd to like, I'm a real casual nerd. And unlike my video series about the things that I missed out on in my fantasy journey, see my description of why I missed out on Dungeons and Dragons growing up. These are the things that influenced me and that caused me to really enjoy and just love the fantasy world for what it is and for how it helped me to really grow into it. And one of those things was RPG Maker. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what it is, it's a program that allows you to do what it says, make an RPG. And for the purpose of this video, I'm only going to talk about the PC/Mac Steam stores. We will silently remember all of the PlayStation versions that have been released throughout the years and their terribleness. They weren't fun. I tried some of them. They were bad. RPG Maker for the computer was an absolute blast because it allowed you to create your world. You can make a great world map and then make villages and dungeons and towns and castles and everything that you might possibly want to fill your world with. And as soon as I found out RPG Maker 95 existed, I was hooked and I wanted to create more and more and more. Unfortunately, I found out about this around 1999 when it was announced that RPG Maker 2000 was going to be coming out. And there was a big difference between the RPG Maker 95 graphics and the RPG Maker 2000 graphics, and I was in for it. The basic idea, even though the two were really different, was that you could make your map and then set your characters, your events to happen on the map. So you would place an NPC and then be able to type and say like when your player character interacts with this NPC, they have this text box and it says, hello, how are you doing today? ? Do you want some ham? And you could say yes or no. And things could happen after that. You would set all these things. It was a lot of coding that I didn't really understand because I don't know coding. But by the time I was really dived in, by the time I really dove in to RPG Maker, I loved their system and it made sense to middle school me and one that I could understand. And it was great to explore and get to create my monsters and items and spells and all these type of things and then make them interact with each other in the game. And it was great, but there was something missing in those first two versions. I loved Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger. And when I saw those RPGs, not only did I see all the worlds that they made, I also noticed the battles. And if you played an old school RPG, you know there's a lot of random encounters, and I wanted to see my characters fight. But in those first two versions, you couldn't until RPG Maker 2003 came along. And that had the side-scrolling battles that I was used to, and you could see your character swing their sword and hit that monster over there, and that was amazing. Well, and then they came out with RPG Maker XP, and I lost interest. I also went to college. Maybe that had something to do with it. I'm not sure. But RPG Maker XP had a lot of great features. In fact, instead of having just little small characters on the screen, you could actually have really big monsters, and it was great. But they took away one of my favorite aspects of the game, the world map. And so instead of having this big world map that your character could explore and then get in a little canoe and go over here, and then in a boat and go over here, and then in an airship and go over here, it was just you going from map to map to map to map, sort of like going through tunnels. And so you went from this village through the forest to the next town. And for me, that just really wasn't all that exciting. And I lost interest in it until RPG Maker VX came out. See, they abandoned the numbers and then went for letters. RPG Maker VX kind of went backwards in a way because we went from tall characters to really short characters again. But the graphics were great and the interface was a lot more user-friendly. And for me, getting back into the hobby of RPG Maker, I needed the user-friendly part. And then RPG Maker VX Ace came along. There was a little bit more features that were added in. And then the one that I've really been encountering right now and playing right now on Steam has been RPG Maker MV. And for me, that was great because it came out on a Mac. And somewhere in between there, I switched from PC to Mac and I needed to get my RPG Maker fix. And I was really glad that I could play RPG Maker on my MacBook instead of trying to bum an old PC off of somebody. Now, RPG Maker MV was great. It had everything of all that I love from all the other ones. My world map was back, my side-scrolling battles were back, and even better, I could customize my characters. So with the previous games, you could download the runtime package, all the things that you needed to just make a game, and you'd have 20 non-playable characters and 20 heroes and 20 monsters. But with RPG Maker MV, there was customization that came along with it. You could actually make your character's face and give them blue eyes instead of green eyes, or brown hair instead of gray hair, or what have you. And then that same character customization would shift to the side-scrolling battle mode. And so my character that I made also had a battle sprite, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. Now, being an author and someone who enjoys stories and writes stories and enjoys making worlds, RPG Maker was amazing because I got a chance to interact with this world. Not only could I write it out and type out what was happening and tell a story in that way through the characters on the screen, but I could also add a rain effect or snow or add music to the scene in such a way that it would affect what was going on. And even better, I could interact with this story and would be able to let other people play it. That was one of the things I loved most about RPG Maker. I have my Final Fantasy VI and my Chrono Trigger locked away in my mind as the formative games, but I also have some RPG Maker games like Exile and some other great ones that are stuck in my head, and they really define the RPG genre for me. They were part of my experience. They were indie games, but they were just as good to me. And so I'm really excited to hear that RPG Maker MZ has been announced. I haven't picked it up yet, but if you're interested in picking this up and maybe diving down a little bit into RPG Maker yourself, I will put a link in the description so that you can go and find out what this beautiful, wonderful program is and maybe lose some hours of your life to this like I have. There are also some really great forums of other people who've made games, currently making them, and maybe who would offer tips and tricks and things like that for you. You can really dive down into the weeds and customize just about everything now. It's really, really neat. But for me, more of the casual game creator, RPG Maker was a fantastic way for me to really dive into the fantasy genre and understand what it would be like if I got to create my own world. And honestly, when I'm writing books, I kind of think in video game terms, like, okay, who's the boss? What's the side quest? How are we going to get to the next main villain? Things like that are really how I create and write books. Hey, I'd love to hear about the things that you have experienced or that you did when you were a kid that really helped shape you and made you love the fantasy genre as a whole. That's what this list is going to be all about. And if you're absolutely new to the channel, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Would you do me a favor and hit this little subscribe orb so that you can be notified of when new videos are out? Tell me in the comments some of the fantasy things that you experienced and enjoyed. I'd love to hear from you. I'm RG Long. Enjoy the journey.